They were locked in to destroy each other's work. Instead, they exposed the system. The boardroom smelled of polished oak and quiet execution. Eliza Morgan stood at the far end of the 12-seat table, a slim tablet resting against her palm like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Around her, the directors avoided eye contact in the way powerful people do when they've already made a decision but prefer someone else to swing the blade. On the central screen glowed a single line in uncompromising red. Architectural Innovations Division, Q3 loss, £48.7 million. No dramatic introduction was required. Numbers were cleaner than speeches. Numbers did not flinch. 30 days, the chairman said, fingers interlocked. Either the division proves sustainable profitability or we dissolve it. Every gaze shifted to Eliza. She was not the most senior person in the room, nor the loudest, but she was the one they sent when something had to end. She nodded once. No hesitation. No visible emotion. I'll handle it. Caleb Wright's studio did not resemble a department on the brink of closure. It resembled a mind in motion. Scale models of skyline concepts occupied steel tables. Digital projections rolled across transparent screens. A half-built tower of composite materials rose from the center like a promise refusing to apologize for ambition. He did not look up when Eliza entered. "You're late," he said calmly, adjusting the angle of a suspended terrace on the model. She checked her watch. She wasn't. "I prefer to observe before I interrupt," she replied. That made him glance at her. Sharp blue eyes. Measured assessment. He had expected an accountant with a guillotine. Instead, he found a woman in a tailored charcoal suit whose composure suggested she had already mapped every exit. "Let me save you time," he continued. "We're not a failed investment. We're a delayed one." Eliza stepped closer to the model. The tower curved upward in spiraled glass, terraces interwoven with vertical gardens. "Delayed investments don't bleed 48 million in a quarter," she said evenly. "They build toward contracts. We're in final review for the London Civic redevelopment tender, which you haven't secured yet." She placed the tablet on the steel table. A series of projections replaced the skyline on the studio wall. Staffing costs, resource allocation, projected liquidation savings. If the tender isn't won, your division closes. Effective immediately, the room quieted. Designers nearby pretended not to listen. Caleb folded his arms. "You're here to intimidate. I'm here to set a timeline." She met his gaze without blinking. "You have 30 days to prove operational viability. Revenue commitments. Investor guarantees. A binding contract. If you succeed, I defend your division before the board. If you fail, I sign the dissolution order myself." The word dissolution landed harder than she intended. He stepped around the model, closing the distance between them. "You'd wipe out 87 employees because a spreadsheet told you to. I would prevent 87 employees from collapsing alongside a project that cannot sustain them. You don't believe in what we're building. Belief is not a line item." For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his expression, anger restrained by discipline. "You know what changes cities?" he asked. "Not cautious cost-cutting. Vision. Vision without capital is architecture on paper." She slid a folder across the table. 30 days, Mr. Wright. Convince me this is more than paper." She turned before he could respond. Behind her, he said quietly, "You'll need to stay close if you want proof." She paused but did not face him. "I intend to." The London headquarters assigned them a glass conference suite on the 28th floor. Transparent walls, restricted access, continuous surveillance, an elegant cage. The internal memo labeled it a strategic review collaboration. The staff called it the glass cage. Eliza moved her temporary desk inside without comment. Caleb arrived with rolled blueprints under his arm and the faint irritation of a man forced to share oxygen with his auditor. "You don't trust remote reporting?" he asked. "I trust proximity," she answered. "If your division survives, it will be because every variable was examined." He dropped the blueprints onto the table. "Then examine this." He unrolled the schematics of the Civic redevelopment tower. Structural innovations minimized steel use by 12%. Energy systems cut projected operating costs by 25%. Community spaces integrated public access terraces to satisfy urban inclusion mandates. Eliza studied the plans in silence. She did not praise them. She did not criticize. She asked about sourcing contracts, risk hedging, supply chain guarantees. Each question was precise. Each answer forced him to refine assumptions he had accepted as adequate. Hours blurred into evenings. Coffee replaced water. The glass cage lights dimmed automatically at midnight. Neither of them noticed. On the fourth day, Caleb snapped. "You're not trying to understand the project," he said, pacing. "You're trying to find a reason to kill it." Eliza kept her eyes on the financial projections. "If I were trying to kill it, I wouldn't be here at 11:30. You enjoy this." "Enjoy what?" "Holding the axe." She closed the tablet. "Do you think I was handed authority because I smile well?" The question cut sharper than intended. He stopped pacing. She continued before he could respond. "Every room I entered early in my career assumed I was decorative. I learned quickly that hesitation costs credibility. Precision keeps you alive." Silence settled. He studied her differently now, not as an adversary, but as a structure he hadn't fully analyzed. "So you became steel," he said. "I became effective. There's a difference. Not in boardrooms." He exhaled slowly. "You think this tower is indulgence. It isn't. It's proof that this company can build responsibly without sacrificing profit." "Then show me how it profits." That night he recalculated projections with her input. Material renegotiations. Phased construction strategies. Alternative investor incentives. She did not soften her tone, but she adjusted timelines when logic justified it. He did not abandon ambition, but he grounded it in quantifiable return. The glass cage stopped feeling like a prison and began resembling a workshop under pressure. By the 10th day, the first internal review meeting approached. Caleb's team presented revised numbers, shaped by Eliza's scrutiny. Efficiency gains narrowed projected losses. External partners expressed conditional interest. When the presentation ended, the interim finance director leaned toward Eliza. "Viable?" he asked quietly. She considered. "Progressing," she replied. Not approval. Not condemnation. A measured acknowledgement. Caleb caught the word. It was the first time she had not framed his division as terminal. Later, alone in the glass cage, he said, "You didn't have to support us." "I didn't," she agreed. "You're adapting. You're influencing. That's the point of collaboration." He leaned against the glass wall overlooking the city lights. "You still think we might fail?" "I think probability is shifting toward." She held his gaze. Uncertain, but no longer impossible. It was the closest she had come to optimism. He smiled faintly. "I'll take that." Outside the transparent walls, employees speculated about the tension between the architect and the executioner. Inside, the dynamic had changed in subtle increments. Arguments became strategic debates rather than personal clashes. She anticipated his creative leaps and prepared frameworks to contain them. He anticipated her objections and reinforced his proposals before she voiced them. The 30-day clock continued ticking, but its rhythm no longer sounded like a countdown to extinction. It sounded like a challenge issued to both of them. On the 15th night, as rain streaked across the glass facade, Caleb adjusted a structural load model and muttered, "If this works, it won't just save my division." Eliza reviewed the accompanying financial model. "It will change your leverage inside the company. It will change yours too." She looked up. "Explain." "If the board sees you not as the woman who closes departments, but as the one who resurrects them, your authority expands." She considered the implication. She had built her reputation on decisive cuts. Redemption was a different currency. "Resurrection requires proof," she said quietly. "Then let's build it." The first round of the civic redevelopment tender concluded on day 18. An encrypted email arrived at 6:12 a.m. Caleb read it twice before speaking. "We passed initial evaluation." Eliza stepped closer. "Conditions?" "They want detailed financial guarantees and sustainability audits." She nodded once. "Then we provide them." There was no celebration, only intensified focus. Passing the first round did not secure victory, but it validated survival as a possibility. For the first time since she entered his studio with termination papers, Eliza allowed herself a private recalculation. This division was no longer a liability to be erased. It was an asset under transformation. As the city moved through its indifferent routines below, two professionals remained inside a glass-walled chamber, refining numbers and blueprints into something that could withstand scrutiny. They had begun as opposing forces assigned to collide. Now they operated as aligned vectors under pressure. The deadline approached without mercy. 30 days had once felt like a countdown to closure. Now it felt like a test neither intended to fail. Day 19 began without ceremony. The glass cage lights flickered on automatically at 7, illuminating blueprints layered over financial projections like two languages forced into fluency. Eliza had slept 3 hours. Caleb had not left the building. The second-round submission required audited sustainability metrics, third-party cost validation, and a binding letter of intent from at least one institutional backer. Ambition alone would not carry them through. Precision would. We need a risk buffer of at least 8%, Eliza said, scrolling through revised cash flow models. 7 keeps us competitive, Caleb replied. 8 keeps you alive if materials spike. Steel futures are stabilizing. Energy isn't. He watched her adjust the figures. She did not argue for dominance. She argued for survival. The distinction mattered. At noon they met with a potential investor via secure conference line. Caleb presented the architectural vision with controlled intensity. Eliza followed with phased return projections and downside mitigation strategies. The investor's questions shifted from skepticism to conditional curiosity. When the call ended, Caleb leaned back. You reframed the liability exposure. You reduced the structural redundancy enough to justify it, she countered. No praise, only acknowledgement of contribution. The dynamic held steady, two minds negotiating toward viability. By day 22, fatigue stripped away performative restraint. Caleb removed his jacket and worked in rolled sleeves, charcoal smudges on his cuff from model adjustments. Eliza loosened the rigid bun at the nape of her neck, strands of dark hair escaping as spreadsheets recalculated. The glass cage no longer felt clinical, it felt lived in. Why architecture? She asked suddenly, eyes still on the screen. You could have built anything. I am building anything, he said. Buildings shape behavior. Public space influences who feels welcome in a city. If profit is the only metric, we design cages disguised as opportunity. He paused. Why corporate restructuring? She did not answer immediately. Because systems collapse when inefficiency is ignored. I fix fractures before they become catastrophes. And if the system itself is flawed, then you strengthen what you can from within. He studied her profile. Or you eventually break trying. She returned to the numbers. Breaking isn't productive. On the evening of day 24, confirmation arrived. A conditional letter of intent from Northbridge Capital, contingent upon final tender approval. Caleb exhaled sharply, tension cracking for a moment. Eliza verified every clause before allowing herself a single nod. This changes our leverage, she said. It doesn't guarantee survival, but it shifts probability. She met his gaze. Yes. The word carried weight. The shift in momentum altered something less quantifiable. Collaboration blurred into alignment. Alignment edged toward trust. Trust, in proximity, invites risk. On day 26, after 14 consecutive hours of preparation for the sustainability audit presentation, Caleb shut his laptop and stared at the skyline beyond the glass. Do you ever stop calculating? He asked quietly. Eliza closed the final report. No, not even now. Especially now. He stepped closer, not aggressively, not strategically, simply closer. You don't have to fight every second, he said. If I don't, someone else sets the terms. I'm not someone else. The statement lingered between them. She felt the shift before she processed it. The atmosphere tightened, not with conflict, but with awareness. Weeks of controlled friction had created heat. Heat demands release. The sustainability audit presentation the next morning proceeded without error. Caleb articulated environmental integration metrics. Eliza dismantled potential financial objections before they were voiced. When the panel adjourned, preliminary feedback was positive. Outside the conference room, adrenaline replaced exhaustion. Caleb laughed once, short and incredulous. We might actually pull this off. She allowed herself a restrained smile. We are statistically competitive. That's the most optimistic sentence you've ever spoken. It's accurate. Back in the glass cage that night, silence settled differently. Not adversarial. Not strategic. Charged. Caleb stepped toward the central model of the tower. You know, he said, tracing the curve of the structure. This design was never just about profit. I know, she answered. He turned. You do? You wouldn't fight this hard for margin alone. The admission stripped away the last layer of pretense. He moved closer again, slower this time, giving her space to withdraw. She didn't. The kiss was not impulsive. It was deliberate. born from accumulated respect and compressed restraint. It altered the architecture of the room more profoundly than any blueprint revision. When they separated, breath uneven but controlled, reality reasserted itself. "This complicates governance optics," she said softly. "We're alone," he replied. "We're not invisible." She stepped back first, restoring physical distance though not emotional neutrality. "We proceed professionally. We always have. Now the margin for error narrows. Then we don't err." Day 28 delivered the final tender shortlist announcement. They had advanced to the final selection phase. The division, once marked for closure, now stood among 3 contenders for a multi-billion-pound redevelopment. Applause erupted from Caleb's team outside the glass cage. Eliza remained composed, but relief registered in the subtle easing of her shoulders. Caleb looked at her as if sharing a secret victory. For a moment, they allowed themselves alignment beyond strategy. They did not see Marcus Hale watching from the mezzanine balcony above the executive floor. He had reviewed the revised financials. He had noted Eliza's growing defense of the division in internal briefings. He had received discreet whispers about the hours she and Caleb spent behind transparent walls long after staff departed. Marcus believed in leverage, and leverage thrives on vulnerability. From his vantage point, the glass cage no longer contained 2 adversaries under evaluation. It contained an opportunity. On day 29, an internal compliance memo circulated announcing a routine review of departmental expenditures across high-risk divisions. The language was neutral. The timing was not. Eliza read it without visible reaction. Caleb frowned. "Routine?" he asked. "Unlikely," she replied. "We passed internal review, which makes us visible." She closed the email. Visibility invites scrutiny. Or sabotage. She did not answer. That evening, as rain pressed against the building again, the glass cage felt less like a workshop and more like a stage under observation. The final board review loomed. Within the hour, Caleb received a separate call from Marcus Hale. The older man's tone carried practiced disappointment. "I fought to protect your division," Marcus said smoothly. "But I'm being handed documentation that suggests financial misconduct." Caleb stood near the glass wall, phone pressed tight. "There is no misconduct. Intent isn't the only factor regulators consider. Optics matter. Who flagged this? Internal compliance. Independent review." A pause calculated for maximum insinuation. "You've been working very closely with Ms. Morgan. Oversight can blur when proximity increases." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Are you implying she?" "I'm implying that relationships complicate objectivity." The line went quiet long enough for doubt to seed itself. "Be careful who you trust," Marcus finished gently before ending the call. Back in the glass cage, tension sharpened the air. "Marcus called you," Eliza said without looking up. Caleb stared at her. "How did you?" "He hasn't contacted me. That means he's isolating communication. He suggested you might have initiated this review." The accusation landed between them, not shouted but heavy. Eliza's eyes lifted slowly. "If I intended to dismantle your division, I wouldn't need fabricated invoices. You've always had the authority." "Exactly." Silence expanded. "Doubt does not require evidence. It requires vulnerability." Weeks of collaboration could not fully erase years of professional conditioning. "You said optics matter," he said. "They do. And now this appears." Which suggests orchestration. Or discovery. The word hung longer than either intended. By midday, internal compliance requested immediate access to all discretionary spending logs and private communication related to the division. The request included Eliza's oversight notes. Caleb felt the walls of the glass cage close in for the first time. "They're treating this like formal investigation," he said. "Because it is," she replied. "Then help me fight it." "I am." "Are you?" The fracture widened. She stood, meeting him directly. "My career collapses if I shield misconduct. I didn't commit misconduct." "Then we prove that. Together?" The question was not procedural. It was personal. She hesitated half a second too long. For a strategist, half a second can destroy trust. At 4:37 p.m., a notification from a major financial outlet appeared across internal feeds. Allegations of budget mismanagement in conglomerate's high-profile redevelopment bid. The article cited anonymous sources within senior governance. It referenced inappropriate executive proximity, influencing oversight. Social media amplified the narrative before official statements could stabilize it. Caleb's team began messaging him in panic. Eliza's direct line filled with board inquiries demanding clarification. The issue had escaped containment. "This is coordinated," Caleb said flatly. "Yes," she agreed. "And effective." An emergency executive meeting was called for the following morning. Pending review, the civic redevelopment bid was temporarily frozen. The letter of intent from Northbridge Capital entered suspension. The 30-day transformation that had shifted probability toward survival now teetered on reputational collapse. Caleb turned away from her, anger surfacing where uncertainty had lived. "You knew how this works," he said quietly. "You navigate these rooms. You see traps. Not always in time. Did you tell him?" "Tell who?" "Marcus. About us." The accusation was softer this time, more wounded than hostile. "No, he knew. Then he observed. Or he was informed." She felt the implication before he voiced it fully. "You think I leveraged you?" "I don't know what to think." That night, the glass cage remained lit long after staff evacuated the floor. They stood at opposite ends of the table that had once been a shared battleground. The space between them felt wider than the city below. "If I wanted your division closed," she said steadily, "I would have executed the order on day one. People change tactics. I don't. Maybe that's the problem." The words cut because they weren't entirely false. Her strength had always been detachment. Now attachment threatened clarity. "You said you weren't someone else," she reminded him. "Prove it," he replied. At 7:02 a.m. the next morning, an official notice suspended Eliza pending investigation into potential conflict of interest violations. The language was clinical. Temporary removal of oversight authority. Caleb received a parallel notice restricting his access to certain financial systems. Two professionals who had rebuilt a failing division were now positioned as liabilities within it. As security protocols updated their access badges, Marcus Hale observed the unfolding consequences from his office with measured composure. He did not need to fabricate outrage. He needed only to amplify suspicion. Eliza packed her temporary workstation in silence. Caleb watched, but did not approach. Pride restrained him. Hurt reinforced the distance. "This is what he wanted," she said quietly. "Division." "He succeeded," Caleb answered. She closed the final folder. "You believe I orchestrated this?" "I believe someone did. And you're not sure it wasn't me?" He did not respond. The absence of denial was louder than accusation. She straightened, composure restored by necessity rather than calm. "Then I'll find proof," she said. "For the investigation? For the truth." She left the glass cage without looking back. By evening, headlines intensified. Commentators debated ethical boundaries between oversight executives and department heads. Share prices fluctuated. The Civic Redevelopment Committee issued a statement expressing serious concern regarding governance stability. Probability, once shifting toward opportunity, now leaned toward collapse. Caleb remained alone in the transparent room that had become both incubator and battlefield. He replayed conversations, recalculated trust, questioned judgment. Doubt is corrosive because it distorts memory. Every moment of closeness now appeared suspect under external narrative. Across the city, Eliza sat at her apartment desk surrounded by printed expenditure logs. She did not cry. She did not call for reassurance. She mapped transaction timestamps against vendor contract renewals. She traced approval chains. She identified anomalies in digital signatures, small inconsistencies that suggested manipulation rather than misuse. Marcus believed she specialized in termination. He had underestimated her capacity for reconstruction. The division stood frozen. The tender bid stalled. Careers balanced on implication rather than fact. The alliance forged under pressure had fractured under suspicion. The system Marcus represented thrived on precisely this dynamic: isolate, destabilize, discredit. What he had not yet accounted for was resilience born from shared survival. But resilience requires trust. And trust, at this moment, lay in ruins. The emergency executive session convened under procedural neutrality and unspoken judgment. Eliza entered as a suspended officer, not as the controlled strategist who had once delivered ultimatums. Caleb entered as a division head under scrutiny, not as the architect of a rising skyline. Marcus Hale sat centered along the curved table, posture relaxed, expression calibrated to concern rather than triumph. Screens displayed flagged transactions in sterile columns. The matter before us, Marcus began evenly, is potential misuse of departmental funds and compromised oversight due to undisclosed personal involvement. The phrasing was surgical. It framed guilt without declaring it. Eliza requested permission to speak first. Granted, she did not defend her reputation. She dismantled the premise. The highlighted transactions were processed through a secondary vendor whose digital authentication logs contained inconsistencies. She projected enlarged metadata comparisons. Signature keys do not match original encryption certificates assigned to Mr. Wright's department. A murmur circled the table. Marcus folded his hands. Digital discrepancies can occur during system migration. These entries were created after system stabilization, Eliza replied. Timestamp anomalies suggest manual insertion. By whom? A director asked. That is the question we should be investigating, she answered. Caleb spoke next. His tone carried restraint rather than indignation. Every discretionary expense has documented project justification. No personal accounts received funds. If irregularities exist, they were inserted. He did not look at Eliza while speaking. Trust had not yet been repaired. Marcus leaned slightly forward. Are you suggesting internal sabotage? I am suggesting the data is not organic, Eliza said. Then we will conduct a full forensic audit, Marcus concluded. Until complete, the civic redevelopment bid remains suspended. He turned to the board. Reputation risk outweighs potential gain. The vote to freeze participation passed narrowly. Marcus did not smile. He did not need to. Outside the chamber, Caleb stopped Eliza before she reached the elevator. You didn't mention the article, he said. Because media narratives don't prove financial tampering. You were composed. I was precise. There's a difference. She met his gaze. You still don't trust me. I don't trust the situation. That's not the same thing. It feels identical. The elevator doors opened. Neither stepped inside. Silence lingered, thick with unfinished reckoning. Marcus benefits from this freeze, she said quietly. If the redevelopment fails, his low-cost housing contracts remain uncontested. You're certain? I'm certain he has motive. Motive isn't evidence. Then we find evidence. That evening, Eliza requested access to archived compliance logs predating her suspension. The request was denied. Restricted clearance. Anticipated. She pivoted. Instead of approaching through formal channels, she reconstructed the vendor chain independently. Public filings revealed that the secondary contractor flagged in the irregular transactions had been incorporated 6 months prior. Its registered address traced to a shell structure linked indirectly to offshore subsidiaries. She cross-referenced those subsidiaries against procurement bids Marcus had championed over the past 3 years. Patterns emerged, not illegal on the surface, but optimized for opacity. Caleb, meanwhile, met with his core design lead in a quiet cafe far from headquarters. Do you trust her? The designer asked bluntly. Caleb stared into untouched coffee. I trusted her judgment. That's not the question. He exhaled slowly. I don't believe she fabricated those entries. Then who? Someone who benefits from division. The realization settled with clarity. Marcus had called before compliance had formally escalated. He had seeded doubt intentionally. Caleb felt anger shift direction, from Eliza to the architecture of manipulation surrounding them. On the 3rd day of suspension, another article surfaced, citing unnamed insiders suggesting romantic entanglement clouded fiscal oversight. Commentary panels debated corporate ethics with theatrical gravity. Eliza watched none of it. She mapped transaction routing through intermediary banks. Small transfers aggregated into larger capital flows tied to development parcels outside the civic redevelopment scope. Parcels acquired quietly through holding companies. Holding companies tied to Marcus's advisory network. She documented each link with timestamp precision. Not accusation, structure. Caleb requested a private meeting with her that evening. Neutral location. Underground parking level beneath headquarters where surveillance was limited to security cameras without audio. She arrived composed, a folder in hand. You found something, he said. Patterns, she corrected. She handed him printed charts. The flag vendor routes through entities adjacent to Marcus's low-cost development contracts. He studied the flow diagram. He redirected funds to fabricate discrepancy. Likely inserted anomalies through compromised access credentials. He'd need clearance. He has oversight authority. The logic tightened. Why frame you as well? Caleb asked. Because proximity created plausible conflict, she answered. If our relationship discredits my oversight, any objection I raise appears defensive. He looked up sharply. So this was calculated from the moment he observed us. Possibly earlier. You think he anticipated? I think he monitors leverage. The understatement masked fury. Caleb stepped closer, not with tension, but with alignment. I was wrong, he said. The words were simple, stripped of pride. About you. She did not respond immediately. You hesitated when I asked if we were together in this, he continued. Because I understood the cost. And now the cost exists regardless. Their eyes held. Trust, once fractured, began reconstructing under shared threat. We need irrefutable proof, Caleb said. Board-level proof. Which means direct financial linkage, she replied. And timing correlation between data insertion and tender advancement. Can you get it? Not alone. He nodded. Then we don't operate alone. They divided strategy. Eliza would focus on digital authentication forensics, isolating the precise window when transaction logs were altered. Caleb would discreetly approach Northbridge Capital, clarifying that internal sabotage, not misconduct, had triggered suspension. If the investor maintained conditional support, the board's risk calculus would shift. 2 days later, Eliza identified a critical anomaly. The flagged entries had been input during a scheduled system maintenance window authorized personally by Marcus under the guise of security upgrades. Access privileges had temporarily expanded. The audit trail embedded a secondary encryption signature, subtle but traceable. She extracted the signature hash and cross-referenced it against executive access credentials. A match surfaced, not direct proof of manual entry, but evidence that the entries originated from a credential pool under Marcus's authority. She sent Caleb a single message, found alignment. He responded, Northbridge still in. Conditional, but watching. The pieces converged. Marcus had frozen the redevelopment to protect his parallel contracts. He had weaponized governance optics to isolate both of them. He had assumed distrust would finish what falsified data began. The board scheduled a final review session to determine permanent action on the division. Marcus intended to recommend dissolution, citing reputational contamination. Eliza requested reinstatement for the sole purpose of presenting forensic findings. The request was granted under narrow parameters. Caleb was permitted to attend, but not to speak unless addressed. On the morning of the session, they stood side by side outside the chamber doors. No glass cage separated them now. No artificial transparency. Only consequence. If this fails, Caleb said quietly, we lose everything. If we do nothing, she replied, we lose it anyway. He nodded once. Alignment restored, not through intimacy, but through shared objective clarity. Inside, Marcus began with controlled gravity. Given unresolved irregularities and sustained media scrutiny, I recommend termination of the Architectural Innovations Division. Before the vote commenced, Eliza requested the floor. She projected the authentication hash comparison. She mapped the maintenance window. She outlined the vendor shell structure. No accusations. Only data. The room shifted. Directors leaned forward. Marcus maintained composure. Correlation is not causation, he said smoothly. Correct, Eliza answered. Which is why I recommend independent external forensic audit before dissolution. She paused deliberately. Terminating the division prior to forensic completion may be interpreted as destruction of potentially exculpatory evidence. The implication reframed the risk. Dissolution no longer appeared protective, it appeared evasive. A director cleared his throat. Mr. Hale, were you aware your maintenance authorization coincided with these entries? Marcus responded without visible strain. System upgrades require executive clearance. Any misuse of expanded access would have occurred without my knowledge. The vote shifted, not to dissolve, but to initiate full independent forensic investigation. The redevelopment bid remained suspended pending outcome. Marcus did not lose control of the room, but he did not secure immediate termination. The first defensive wall had held. Outside the chamber, Caleb exhaled. You force delay. Delay creates exposure, she replied. Exposure creates error. You're counting on him making one. I'm counting on pressure revealing structural weakness. The war had not been won. The division was not restored. Their reputations were not repaired. But the narrative had changed from presumed misconduct to contested sabotage. Marcus had expected fracture and silence. Instead, he faced coordinated resistance backed by data. As they walked toward the elevators together, the alliance no longer felt fragile. It felt strategic. And for the first time since the glass cage became a battlefield, the advantage had begun to shift. The external forensic firm arrived without fanfare and without loyalty. Their mandate was narrow: authenticate the integrity of transaction logs, verify access trails, and determine whether budget irregularities resulted from misuse or manipulation. Marcus publicly welcomed the audit. Privately, he accelerated parallel negotiations tied to his low-cost housing contracts. Time was now a variable he could not fully control. Eliza worked from outside official channels, but within permitted review boundaries. Suspension limited her authority, not her analytical capacity. She compiled a structured dossier: vendor and corporation records, offshore routing diagrams, timestamp variance reports, credential pool overlaps during the maintenance window Marcus had authorized. Every page was labeled, cross-indexed, and neutral in tone. No adjectives, only sequence. Caleb handled external stabilization. He met discreetly with Northbridge Capital's risk committee. "We remain operationally viable," he said. "The audit will confirm data insertion." The investors listened carefully. They did not commit enthusiasm. They committed patience. That was enough. 3 days into the forensic review, a quiet anomaly surfaced. The external auditors requested clarification regarding a secondary encryption key embedded in the flagged transactions. The key matched a privileged access token assigned temporarily during the maintenance upgrade. That token had been logged as inactive at the time of entry, yet it had executed commands. Inactive credentials do not execute commands unless reactivated. Reactivation requires executive-level override. Marcus maintained executive-level override. The auditors requested direct interview with him. Marcus received them in his office overlooking the river. Calm, cooperative. He framed the maintenance window as routine governance diligence. "Any misuse would constitute internal breach," he stated, "which I would strongly condemn." He provided system documentation. He did not provide voluntary admissions. The auditors left with measured neutrality. They did not accuse. They did not absolve. Meanwhile, Caleb reviewed archived internal chat logs with his IT director. During the maintenance window, certain back-end notifications had been suppressed. Suppression commands originated from an administrative console rarely accessed outside executive review cycles. "Who authorized this?" Caleb asked. The IT director hesitated. "Executive oversight." Specifically, a pause. "Mr. Hale's office." Caleb transmitted the information to Eliza through a secure, encrypted channel. She integrated it into her dossier, but did not act impulsively. Pressure must converge, not scatter. The audit timeline estimated 7 additional days before formal findings. Marcus continued maneuvering in parallel, advocating to several board members that prolonged uncertainty eroded shareholder confidence. He suggested that even if sabotage occurred, leadership optics had already been compromised. Dissolution remained, in his framing, the cleanest remedy. The turning point came unexpectedly. A junior compliance analyst, assigned to assist the external firm, requested access to archived server snapshots predating the maintenance window. Standard practice did not require retrieval that far back. Curiosity did. Within those snapshots, the analyst located a pre-configured template for discretionary transaction insertion, an unused script embedded months prior to the alleged irregularities. The template contained placeholder vendor codes later matching the shell entity flagged in Caleb's division. The script's origin tag traced to an internal development environment registered to executive operations. Executive operations reported to Marcus. The forensic firm escalated the discovery immediately. Chain of custody preserved. Metadata authenticated. The pattern now indicated preparation, not improvisation. Eliza received preliminary notice of the finding before formal board circulation. She did not celebrate. She recalibrated. Evidence of premeditated scripting transformed the narrative from possible opportunistic manipulation to structural orchestration. Marcus had not reacted to their rising success. He had anticipated it. Caleb stood beside her in the dim light of her apartment as she reviewed the snapshot logs. "He built the mechanism before we even advanced in the tender," he said. He needed leverage ready, she replied. In case your division became inconvenient. Or in case we did. The implication carried weight beyond corporate rivalry. Their relationship had not created vulnerability. It had triggered deployment of an existing contingency. The board scheduled an emergency session upon receiving the forensic firm's interim report. This time, the atmosphere differed. Directors arrived not with passive distance, but with sharpened scrutiny. Marcus entered last, expression unchanged. The lead forensic auditor presented findings without narrative embellishment. We identified a pre-configured transaction insertion script embedded within executive operations months prior to the alleged irregularities. The script structure matches the pattern of the flagged entries. Activation occurred during a maintenance window authorized by Mr. Hale. Silence followed. Not speculative silence. Evidentiary silence. Marcus spoke carefully. Possession of administrative scripting tools does not equate to misuse. Correct, the auditor replied. However, the activation sequence required executive override credentials. The override record aligns with your authorization. A director leaned forward. Are you asserting Mr. Hale personally executed the insertion? We are asserting that the insertion originated within an executive credential environment under his authority. Marcus maintained composure, but the shift was visible in microseconds. Blink rate increased, jaw tightened fractionally. If my credentials were compromised, that constitutes a separate breach, he said. Eliza requested the floor. Credential compromise would require access logs indicating unauthorized external penetration. No such breach appears in system diagnostics. Additionally, suppression of back-end notifications occurred simultaneously from the same console. She paused. The pattern indicates coordinated internal action. A vote was called to initiate formal investigation into executive misconduct pending regulatory notification. Marcus objected, citing reputational catastrophe. The board overruled. Security entered not to arrest, but to restrict system access. Marcus stood slowly. You are making a strategic mistake, he said evenly. No one responded. He exited under observation. The civic redevelopment bid reinstatement remained unresolved, but dissolution was no longer on the table. The narrative had inverted. Caleb's division was not a liability. It was a near casualty of executive manipulation. Media outlets pivoted tone within hours as leaks reframed the scandal. Commentators who had debated romantic ethics now debated governance corruption. Share volatility stabilized cautiously. In the quiet after the session, Caleb turned to Eliza. You dismantled him without raising your voice. Data did, she replied. You assembled it. We assembled it. The correction mattered. Weeks earlier, distrust had fractured alignment. Now alignment had restored credibility. Northbridge Capital issued a renewed statement of conditional support contingent on final governance stabilization. The redevelopment committee reopened tender evaluation. The path forward remained steep, but it was no longer obstructed by falsified collapse. Later that night, alone in the glass cage for the first time since suspension, Caleb stood beside the central model of the tower. The structure had not changed. The context had. Eliza joined him quietly. You realize, he said, even if we win the tender, staying here may not be sustainable. She studied the skyline beyond the glass. Governance reform will be lengthy. Trust erosion lingers. They'll associate us with the scandal. Yes. He looked at her. Would you regret it? Regret what? Choosing alignment. She met his gaze steadily. No. Outside the transparent walls, the corporation recalculated power structures. Inside, two professionals who had entered as adversaries now understood the system's fault lines intimately. Marcus had built contingencies to eliminate threats. He had underestimated resilience forged under pressure and verified by evidence. The final battle would not be emotional. It would be procedural, public, and irreversible. And for the first time since the 30-day ultimatum began, they were not reacting to strategy. They were shaping it. The boardroom that morning was filled with muted anticipation. Chairs were aligned precisely. The polished oak table reflected the cold light of early winter sun. Eliza and Caleb arrived together, not as accused and observer, but as aligned professionals prepared to present evidence and secure the division's future. Marcus Hale entered last, composed, his posture neutral, Yet every micro-expression betrayed subtle calculation. He knew the session's stakes: control, credibility, and reputation, but he underestimated the preparation of the two he sought to destabilize. Eliza requested the floor immediately, presenting the forensic audit step by step. She displayed the pre-configured insertion script, time-stamped activation logs, and credential override paths. She traced the shell vendors to Marcus's indirect holdings and highlighted suppression of back-end alerts during the maintenance window. Every slide was factual. No accusation, no rhetoric. Data spoke louder than conjecture. Caleb interjected only when procedural clarification was required, reinforcing her findings with verification from Northbridge Capital's Risk Committee. Directors leaned forward. Murmurs began to ripple quietly. Marcus maintained his calm exterior, but his strategic advantage had eroded. Evidence now implied orchestration rather than accident. The division, previously under threat of dissolution, now emerged as a potential victim of internal sabotage. Every argument Marcus made, about optics, reputational risk, and administrative precedent, was countered by time-stamped digital proof. One senior director finally broke the quiet. If these findings hold, the responsibility rests squarely within executive operations, under Mr. Hale's authorization. The statement carried weight. Marcus's jaw tightened fractionally. Eliza paused, allowing silence to emphasize the implication before continuing. The data demonstrates that discretionary transactions were not only premeditated but executed using executive privileges during a window you authorized. Caleb stepped forward, projecting corroborating emails and system logs. Marcus attempted to redirect the narrative, framing the data as indicative but not causative. But the momentum had shifted. Directors questioned the integrity of internal controls under his tenure. Northbridge Capital representatives, present via secure feed, indicated renewed confidence in the division's stability contingent on Marcus's recusal from oversight. The board voted unanimously to initiate formal regulatory review of Marcus's executive actions, effectively neutralizing his influence over the division. The civic redevelopment bid, frozen for weeks, was reinstated immediately. The division's credibility, once teetering on suspension, now became a symbol of resilience. Employees returned, cautious but relieved, and morale began to recover. The glass cage, once a crucible of tension, now stood as a monument to their collaborative perseverance. In the quiet aftermath, the glass cage no longer felt like a crucible. "We didn't just survive," Eliza said, her eyes fixed on the reinstated tender notification. "We rewrote the parameters." Caleb stood beside her, the physical distance between them finally closing as they looked out at the city they had fought to reshape. "Then let's stop playing by their rules," he replied. The victory wasn't just the board's approval, it was the leverage they now held. While the board celebrated the secured contracts, Caleb and Eliza utilized the momentum to insulate their team, ensuring that the transparency they had fought for became the new structural standard. Every decision was no longer a negotiation with fear, but a calculated step toward the exit they were already planning. The 18 months required to top out the tower became a masterclass in strategic execution. While the regulatory probe systematically dismantled Marcus Hale's remaining network, Caleb and Eliza functioned with a synchronized efficiency that made the board increasingly nervous. They didn't wait to be thanked. On the evening of the final structural inspection, they delivered their joint resignation. They left behind a landmark building and a division that could no longer be manipulated, moving instead into a private practice where the only oversight that mattered was their own. Standing on the pavement of the completed London site, the skyscraper looming above them was no longer a cage of glass, but a monument to the day they stopped being variables and started being the architects of their own reality.